Hi there, everybody. I hope you're doing well today. My name is Rebecca, and I'm the Education Director for the association. I'm thrilled that you've joined us today because we have a wonderful presentation ahead of us for you. This is part of our Navigating Uncertain Times webinar series, which was inspired by an idea that our president of the board of directors had. And the goal of this webinar series is to offer you new ideas about how to pivot or refine your business operations in light of our current economic times. And so before I turn it over to Charlie, I do want to confirm that yes, you are in the right webinar if you're here for industry trends and forecasts. We're going to start in a second. I'm going to ask folks to remain muted throughout the presentation and to hold your questions for the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. And if you are not a member yet, I do want to point out that we have a QR code here, and we're offering a special discount for people who want to join today. So I'll put this QR code back up at the end of the presentation, but just be aware that we'd love to have you join us. We have webinars, all kinds of resources available for you. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Charlie. Are you ready, Charlie?
I am always ready. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah. I have a microphone. That automatically means I'm ready. So, good morning, folks, and thanks for the invitation to come and visit with you a little bit. I have just an incredible partner today on today's webinar, Dr. John Dole, and we just found out that he is the Liberty Hyde Award winner from the American Horticulture Society. So, that is awesome, and congratulations, John. And
Thank you,
John,
Charlie.
yeah. And John and I are going to have a conversation today. Now, I'm kind of known for having just a plethora of charts, but I'm mixing things up today. I'm going to
Good.
start by not having many charts, although I do have them in the background in case I need to refer back to them. So I just want to admit right at the very get-go that I understand the trepidation that you're going through. Now, I'm assuming that some of you are coming online and you've got a little bit of worry about some current economic conditions, a lot of uncertainty. And in fact, 2025 was the year of uncertainty, and it all started with a series of tweets. I need to articulate that better. A series of tweets at the beginning of the year that talked about tariffs. And of course, that set in motion just a flurry of activity and people trying to get imports in as quickly as possible before the April 1 deadline, when the cost of everything was going to be increasing because of the tariffs. So I'll come back to that here in a second. But I just wanted to acknowledge that it's been a big uncertain time period. So the format today, as Rebecca mentioned, I'm going to start talking about kind of the 30,000 foot view, economically drill down to ground level, and John will and I will talk about, all right, what do you do about it? That's the key thing. I always approach it from a Venn diagram standpoint. There's this great big circle of all the things that matter. And there's another great big circle of all the things that you can control. And it's the intersection of those two circles. That intersection is what you need to work on. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is that intersection between the things that matter. I'm not saying that tariffs don't matter, but you don't control the tariffs. So what are the things that you do control? And then we'll focus on that. So let's talk about the macroeconomic perspective. Obviously, there's been some inflation that we've had to deal with that you see in the media and everything, and it wasn't unexpected. John, as every economist worth his or her salt, knew that inflation was coming down the pike whenever we passed $5 trillion worth of fiscal policy measures during the pandemic, and then $5 trillion worth of monetary policy measures, and you throw that much money into the M2 money supply, the economy's going to heat up. But we'd never been through a global pandemic before, And so we learned a lot of lessons during the COVID pandemic time period. It disrupted cut flower supply chains worldwide. And we metamorphosized those supply chains both domestically and internationally. And those lessons have come into play during this past year of uncertainty. So while things are uncertain and we may have some degree of trepidation, they're not as uncertain as what they could have been, because we put so much into motion during the pandemic. And everybody that's online, all 124 people at the moment, there's still people coming in. Everybody that's online, I guarantee you do certain things differently in your business today than you did prior to 2020 when the pandemic. And it's been 6 years. Can you believe it's been 6 years since all of that disruption? But it made us better. And the fact that you're online today proves to me that you learned some things during that global pandemic and you're doing things differently. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, because it created such a cash flow dilemma for many businesses. So consumers today are facing that inflationary pressure when we go to the supermarket, when we go buy a car, when we go buy clothes. We see it everywhere we go, in spite of being told by the current administration. And again, when I say current administration, I'm not throwing stones. I don't talk partisanship. I talk policies. All right, and there's a big difference. But still, some people get upset with me from time to time because I'll knock a particular policy, but I'm approaching it from an economic lens. I'm not approaching it from a political lens, and there's a big difference. So I'm just put that out there up front as well. So the increased cost of things have cost a lot of trade-offs. And of course, economics is all about trade-offs. And every single customer that's out there is just like you and me. Everybody is making trade-offs every day. Is this product worth the money that I'm going to put toward it versus something else? What's my opportunity cost of buying something else? And John, the good thing is that people aren't stopping buying flowers. I just got the Valentine's Day survey data from SAF. They hire Ipsos to go and do that survey. And there were 35% of Americans bought cut flowers during Valentine's Day. It just happened to be the very same percentage as what was in 2025, which was even higher than 24. And so part of that, though, remember that's sales. We're not measuring units. Mm-hmm. So since the pandemic, obviously the price of cut flowers has gone up, both domestically and imported flowers. That price has gone up. So you get a little bit of a sales lift just from the price increase. So, but units, we don't even have a database measuring how many units we sell. But now cotton, soybeans, corn, etc., we can measure exactly the bushels, and for meat, the hundredweight of meat that's sold, and that's kept, the unit data is right there. But in our industry, not so much. So when I go and I survey folks, without the absence of data, I got to go ask people, and I ask them about their top line sales. I ask them about their bottom line net profits, and I ask them about units. And these are growers, not just cut flower growers, but perennial growers, shrub growers, etc. Now this is collective data here, because I don't want, well, the people I'm collecting data, they know that I'm aggregating all that data. So I want to hold to the promises I've made them. So it's a bell-shaped curve. If you look at all the people year over year that have experienced increases, it's a bell-shaped curve from positive 25% to negative 25%. So what that means, John, is that you've got folks that really 2025, I'm looking at last year's data, they were knocking the ball out of the ballpark. Top line sales were up, bottom line net profits were up, and units were up. So it's the trifecta. But a bell-shaped curve means that you've got the majority of folks right there in the middle, plus or minus 0 to 5%, plus or minus. And that's where the majority of folks were. But you had some in the same industry, same year, same time period, that had negative top line sales year over year, and or bottom line net profits were negative year over year on units. Some of them had the trifecta in the wrong direction. Now, John, I'm always quick to tell people year over year results are not the end all be all, because there were some last year or 2024, they had their best year ever. And if they didn't have their best, they didn't beat their best year ever the next year, then automatically it's going to be down year over year. So year over year comparisons, and I know that some of you, when you're looking at your income statements and your balance sheets and you're comparing the time periods, you're saying, oh, we're up here in this category, we're down here. All right, that's a needed analysis. Congratulations. Absolutely, you should do that. But you'd also look at the 3-year average and see where the overall trending is going. And then you'll have a little better feel. And if you really want to go and have a complete picture, you'll go all the way back to 2019, pre-pandemic, and see how your performance now compares to pre-pandemic conditions. So that, to me, that's when you're doing an adequate job of measuring your performance. So I'm kind of sneaking over to the second half of our conversation. So we got inflation, and we're dealing with it. And it's still in the 3% range, and it's not coming down anytime soon because we've implemented tariffs. And in any economics textbook 101, well, you'll see that the country that's importing product into the U.S. doesn't pay the tariff. It's the it's the customs broker or the importer of record who pays the tariffs and sends it to Washington. So unlike what we were told by some in their tweets and so forth, that's not the way it happens. And so what's happened is there's been a cash flow crunch at that point in the supply chain. Customs brokers and importers have had to come up with the cash to pay the tariffs. And that's caused a cash flow issue within the entire industry. So we've got those inflationary pressures, and we've got that cash flow crunch at the same time at different points in the supply chain. Now, fortunately, interest rates are starting to trickle down slightly, but we're still in a high interest rate period. But I chuckle. Now, John and I, we're both old enough to know or to remember the 70s. Right? We still have some tie-dye T-shirts to prove it. We can remember the 70s. And during the 70s, we're talking about 18. Yeah, Tina gave me a thumbs up there, so Tina remembers that too. So, but during the 70s, we had a time period where inflation was 18%. So when we look at inflation now of 5, 7, 9%, people are saying, oh my gosh, it's because people have never managed their business during inflationary time periods. But really, that's not really high inflation. It's resilient and what's the other R word? It's resilient, and it just stays there, and it's not coming down. We're having to deal with it. And what it's going to take is interest rates to keep coming down. But here's the conundrum. When interest rates come down, operating lines of credit, that gets cheaper. CapEx expenditures get cheaper. The paying down long-term debt, we can pay it with cheaper dollar. But the thing is that stimulates the economy, gets more people buying, which creates an inflationary effect. So it's a yin and a yang, and so that's what the Federal Reserve, all these decades now, has been wrestling with, is how do we manage that fiscal policy, monetary policy measure in such a way that we can limit inflation but create high employment, right? That's their twofold mission. All right, so labor. I'm not going to cover labor that much because I know John has all the answers on labor.
Oh, Charlie.
But it's there's a labor quantity issue and there's a labor wage issue, and they're correlated. But John was one of the founders of the Seed Your Future program, and Seed Your Future is trying to educate folks at the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade level that horticulture, and in this case cut flowers, is a great career opportunity. And so they're now in, what year are we in Seed Your Future now, John?
12th year.
12th year. And so it's a long game, right? Trying to change the course of young people going into horticulture. It's a long game. And the reason we're catching them early is that we can get them before they're brainwashed into being a doctor, a lawyer, and so forth. But here's the catch. We tell you, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, you can get a PhD, and so forth, because we need PhDs in horticulture. We need growers, we need mechanics, we need engineers, we need scientists within horticulture. So anyway, I digress a little bit. The key thing about labor is that right now we're in a situation where during the pandemic we had 2 jobs for every person looking for a job. Oh, wow. I just created some balloons there in my picture. I forgot that I can do that. 2 jobs for every 1 person looking for a job. John, right now we have 0.98 jobs for every person looking. So it's a tighter job market, right? There's fewer jobs. So people aren't bouncing around from firm to firm like we saw during the pandemic, when people said, you know what, if I'm going to go back to work, I'm going to go to a job that's fulfilling to me. Not just the same job that I had just to earn money to live, but I'm going to seek out a career. So we had a number of people jumping ship and going to different things. I had some people going into cut flowers, growing cut flowers themselves, right? Because they had always had that inkling, and they acted on it. So we saw the number of cut flower growers actually increase domestically because of that. Now, there's some other supply chain issues besides interest rates that are creating a lot of interesting dynamics. It was just announced the Colombian wage rate, the minimum wage, was increasing by 25%. And of course, Colombia imports a lot of flowers, as though I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know that. But those cut flowers are much more expensive to grow in Colombia than they were prior to this policy measure by the Colombian government. So that's increased their landed cost, which where it comes into play with you guys is that then the differential between domestically grown cut flowers and imported cut flowers, which are grown at scale, and the economies of scale means that the overall landed cost of those flowers relative to domestic flowers is typically lower. That's how the share has changed over time. That's why we have 80% of the flowers that are consumed are imported. It's just economics. It's cheaper to grow, cheaper wage rates. So if that landed cost increases, the differential decreases. But you know what? All right, that's a benefit. It may be a temporary benefit. It may be a long-term benefit. Remember the things that matter, the things you can control. You can't control what the wage rate in Colombia is, but you can control your value proposition. You can control what your difference is and why people should be paying for your flowers versus imported flowers, and that messaging is critical. That's what affects what we economists call inelasticity of demand. And the more you talk and refine your messaging, whether it be about the health and well-being benefits of the cut flowers you sell, whether it be about the lower environmental footprint, carbon footprint associated with the flowers that you sell, you got to be careful there that you've done a life cycle analysis to prove that. Otherwise, we call it greenwashing. But you need to be very clear in your messaging on the benefits that you bring to the table, so that people are willing to pay the price that you need to make a profit, and so that profit as you measure over time is increasing and covers your input cost. All right, so that's some of the dynamics that are happening from an importing standpoint. When you look at your competitive position, again, it's the proximity to markets. That's one of the key things that is on your competitive advantage checklist, and the seasonal and the local differentiation that you got. All those things are you're more nimble than anybody else in the whole floral supply chain. Or if you're not nimble, you should be nimble. I mean, you control what product you're putting out every year, how much you're going to harvest, and so forth. So those parameters help differentiate you in the marketplace. Plus, the other thing is the relationships that you got with your customer base, right? Whether you're selling B2C or whether you're selling B2B, here in Texas, we've got some of both. We got some folks that like selling to H-E-B, and H-E-B. H-E-B is like the premier supermarket in the world, by the way. And all this rhetoric about H-E-B customers being a cult, it's true. We love H-E-B. We would do anything for H-E-B. It's like Publix on the East Coast and so forth. And Wegmans up north, right? There's a lot of different regionals. Anyway, I digress. But some growers sell to H-E-B, some growers sell directly to customers through various mechanisms. And we got some people that do that quite successfully. And some of you can guess who I'm talking about as I'm talking about that. I want to go back to consumers for a second because they're the key here. We have seen some softening in terms of the mass market. And that in some cases, that's your competition. We've seen some softening in terms of the mass market channels and the cut flowers moving through those channels. And the specialty florist, I'm going to mute myself 1 second so I can clear my throat. It's the specialty florist. It's the B2C, the farmer florist, the subscription services, studio florist, and when you're supplying those kinds of customers, that's where you get the premium pricing and you get the premium experience. And to me, as an ASCFG member, you're all about that, right? And so the customers, though they are bifurcated, that's another fancy economic term, meaning that there's a continuum of customers. And all customers are not created equal. That's a misnomer in the marketplace. Not all customers are created equal. So some of those customers have a higher income than others. Some of them have greater needs to buy different flowers than the standard commoditized flowers. And so those higher end customers, whether it be by income or by taste and preferences, that's your bread and butter. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got lower income families. And I'm not saying that you don't have any customers that are in that lower socioeconomic status, but that's not typically who buys most of the cut flowers in the country, right? That's not the case. We weeded out the middle, and we got the high end, and we got the bottom 80%. And there's a lot of sales in that bottom 80%. I'm not saying that. I guess what I'm saying is that there's a lot of cut flowers that are purchased by the top 20%. And the top 20% are willing to pay for quality, for service dimensions, for diverse products, and that's got your name written all over it, right? So that's the bifurcated customer is exactly that whole trending works in your favor, right? So you got to ask yourself if your own sales are trending in the wrong direction, and the market would dictate that I should be going in the upward direction, you really got to do some soul searching and figure out what it is. And we're going to come to that in the second half of our talk. So, John, that may be a good transition point. The only other thing I was going to mention is that when I talk about national economic trends, it's one thing. And then I filter it down to regional economic trends. And then ultimately, it comes down to local. I like the phrase, all politics is local. Well, really, it's the local economy. So every single one of you online that are on the webinar, you have you have your market, right? And it tends to be narrower in scope than the mass supermarkets, right? Albertsons, Kroger, so forth. They have a bigger reach, obviously, than you do. But that doesn't mean that you can't play on the fact that you're local. And now I wanted to refer to a study that I did several years back, along with some colleagues, Bridget B. Hitt, Michigan State, and others. And we looked at tagging something, labeling something as local, organic, and sustainable. Those three labels. And what we found that if you look at likelihood to purchase and willingness to pay, both the likelihood and the willingness to pay increased with one of the three in both cases, but not the other two. Local was the only one that generated a greater likelihood of purchase and a greater willingness to pay. Well, that's got ASCFG members all over it, right? It's all about local and being all that for my customer base and within my market, my trade area. So I think that might be a good leaping off point, John, to make a transition here.
All right. Well, thank you. Yes. Well, that is a great transition. Local is certainly making a big difference. And, I'll go back to what Charlie said at the very beginning, talking about what you can control and what you can't control. Charlie talked about a lot of factors there, some of which we can control, some of which we can't. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the things that we can do. And I'm going to go ahead and share the screen for just a little bit. So I'm going to start here with this military term. I'm sure Charlie is familiar with it, VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Man, boy, Charlie, you covered all the factors that fit under those things, didn't you? And in terms of what's happening. I'm thinking back to COVID and what a ride it has been since COVID, because it just seems like we got a couple months, things settle down, and then something new pops up in the news that is adding to our volatility, uncertainty, complexity, or ambiguity. And then you add that into what we were dealing with before even COVID, changing consumer preferences. That is still going on and will continue to go on. Charlie mentioned labor availability. Yes, that still is an issue. And I know for many of you, it's becoming even more of a concern. Changing weather patterns. This isn't necessarily a problem, but where does AI figure into our businesses? How can we use it, and so forth? So we have a lot going on. I think of floriculture and cut flowers in particular of being a combination of ag and fashion. We have all the challenges of ag having to do with pests, diseases, and when to irrigate, when to cut. And then we've got the fashion that changes, which color pink is in a particular year. So with all that in mind, remember to go back to the basics of business management. This is the part that you have control over. Okay, what is your vision, for your business? Why did you start your business? Or why are you still in your vision or still doing your business? Think that through, focus on it. Focus on your communications. Oh my gosh. We talk a lot in administration about crisis communications, but the basics are there. Keeping the message short and to the point. There's a general rule, shall we say. It's the 3-9-27 rule, which is 3 messages, 9 words for each, and no more than 27 words altogether.
I like it.
There's the science that proves that when things get hairy, we tend to only hear three things. So we can go and discuss 29 different things, but people are only going to hear three. So keep your message, and that message is for your staff. Let's say you suddenly find out from the city that your farmer's market is going to be moved all the way across town. That's a bit of a crisis. And the staff are worried, are we still going to do farmers markets? So that's time to communicate very clearly, succinctly, and directly. And the same with our customers. Charlie brought up the study about local, and that I think is real important for us to tell our story, communicate that story, so that 3927, that's what you can start with to get your message across. And then you can always elaborate later. But keep in mind that when you're trying to communicate, keep the message short, succinct, and no more than three main points to it. So do contingency planning and risk management planning. Boy, we had a couple of great talks at the ASCFG conference that dealt with this topic. Um, they did just a wonderful job on thinking through this is what you can do in terms of keeping control of things. You can think through problems that could occur. What if we got a flood in the lower field? What would we do then? What if we lost power for 3 or 4 days? What are we doing? I know that's scary to think through all those things, but generally most of us feel better after we've thought through them and then realize, oh yeah, we could handle this. We could take care of this. All right. So do some of your contingency risk management. And then the next two here focus on marketing cost accounting. I've got a little bit more on that. But before I get too much further, you got to remember the basics of focusing on yourself, taking care of yourself. We tend to think of this as a luxury. We tend to think of, going off and taking a bit of a vacation as a luxury. You need to reframe that. We don't do well when we're stressed out when making important decisions. This is not a luxury. This is a critical factor in your business of taking care of yourself and being ready to make those decisions when things happen. All right. So let me go ahead. Let's talk a little bit about marketing. Of course, Charlie can do this part better than me, but I'll just go ahead and get us started. Who are your target customers? It's easy when a crisis happens to start thinking about what I need to do to make some extra money. We got to be careful with that because if we lose the focus on our main customers, our business in general may suffer. What customer needs are you satisfying? Okay. Yeah, why are they buying from you and not from somebody else? And Charlie's absolutely right. There are so many reasons that people are buying from specialty cut flower growers in the US than they are from a supermarket or a big mass market retailer. They want to connect with you. They want to connect with your story. You're giving a high value. You're giving a diverse product mix. You're providing a lot of support and service. There are a lot of reasons why folks want to buy from us. So think that through for your business. Okay, what image does your business project? How are you reaching your customers? Are you investing money in marketing? If not, you probably need to be. I know that I get a little cringy when I hear the cliche, it takes money to make money. But in this particular case, I agree with it. Sometimes you got to spend a little bit of money to get some return in marketing. And then, of course, how you determine if your marketing is effective. There's lots of little tricks. And again, go to the ASCFG. There's webinars and things that can help you with putting all of this information together. Before I move on to basics of business, do you want to add anything on marketing, Charlie?
Well, I think marketing starts again with your value proposition that you develop your sales messaging off of. But there's a correlation. You mentioned vision as one of the very first things. And in my EAGLE program, which is an executive education program for growers that I've been teaching now for 14 years, the very first thing we do is we look at the core values of the firm. and the core purpose, or that vision. It's another word for vision, that core purpose. And until you got the core values set and your purpose slash vision set, I agree with you. You could do all the other things that you're doing are meaningless. You've heard the phrase, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Well, it's the same way with your employees. If they don't know what the core values are and it's not embedded within the culture of your firm, whether you've got 4 employees or you got 40 or 400, it's the same principle. You want everybody on the same page in terms of where we headed, and most importantly, what are the behaviors that are expected while we're heading there, right? And you may say, well, there's accountability is one of our core values. We're accountable to each other and so forth. But then when you look on a typical day, not everybody's coming back from lunch at the same time or showing up at the same time. And particularly for small businesses, there's a lot of leeway that's given because we don't want to run people off. It's hard as heck to get a hold of them in the first place. Those core values are, as we say in Texas, muy importante. They're critical to the rest of the operation, because the efficiencies that you also alluded to all boil down to SOPs and standard operating procedures, another great military term, right? And I talk SOPs, but I talk about COEs too, because in COEs is not necessarily known as much as correction of errors. And that in spite of having SOPs in place, there's always errors that happen in the thick of things, right? When we're at our busiest, you can pretty well guarantee that something is going to happen. And those errors either occurred because we didn't have an SOP, or we didn't train people on the SOP, or somebody ignored the SOP. And that's a core value violation right there. You invite them to get on somebody else's bus if they continually do have those core value violations. So I wanted to hit on those couple of points that, yeah, it's values is important. And from a marketing standpoint and an operational efficiency standpoint, we got SOPs in place for a reason, because we can't, everybody on here, if you own the business, you want to be able to operate the business without you necessarily having to be there all the time. You want it to continue operating. But then if you're working in the business and you love it, you just want to make sure that you're doing things right. Because having a business requires sustainability in a lot of different ways. People, planet, profit. You got to have the right people working for you, the right customers. You got to have be good for the planet, but you got to have a profit. And without a profit, you're not going to be sustainable for very long. Anyway, I'm pontificating now, John, so I'll quit right there and you can move to the next topic.
All right, very good. Okay, so basics of cost accounting for the next year. Have you done a cost analysis of your marketing channels and products? If you have, is it ongoing? Does it need to be updated? And if you've not, then do so. All right, and again, contact, go through the ASCFG website. There's a couple of great presentations that can walk you through that. Again, this is something you can control. You can know where your expenses are going. And I'm going to say this right off the beginning. We so often focus on the clear, simple numbers, the cost of a seed, the cost of a tuber, the cost of a flat. And then we tend to not pay attention to the unit cost of labor, whether that be our own or our employees. And if there's anything I can add onto that, to the basic cost accounting part, is really be thinking about the labor costs and going through and figuring out. And there's different ways of handling that. It's kind of a big topic, but Charlie's done quite a bit of work on that as well.
Yeah, John, I started in 1984 doing cost accounting as part of my master's thesis. I'm still doing cost accounting.
It's that important.
Yeah.
Charlie talked about B2B, and so I'm just going to show you real quick what those are. That's business to business. So like selling to retail florists, designers, grocery store, local retail buyers, floral wholesalers, cooperatives and collectives. Any one of these can be a talk in and of itself, and we're not going to go through that. But just to give you an idea, and then direct to consumers, whether that be farmers markets, CSAs, farmer florists. We've got cooperative and collectives again, because some of them actually sell directly to the public. Flower pop-ups, those a new one. That's so much fun. And then of course all the on-farm stuff. These are all exciting and fun, and I'm sure everybody's looking at this thinking about them, but we're going to give you a caution. Do the basics first before you start looking at all of these other marketing methods, because you got to make sure you're optimizing what you're doing, because it takes a lot to get customers. And once you've got customers, you want to be sure to keep them and keep them happy. So again, remember the basics of business management, the things that we've mentioned here, and then be sure to take care of yourself. Move that from the luxury column to the must-do column to make sure that your business is successful. All right, with that, I'm going to stop sharing of the slides, and I know we've got some questions already in the chat. But before we do that, anything else you wanted to add, Charlie, before we go to questions?
Just one quick note that was from the cost accounting standpoint. You already alluded to this. I just want to reiterate it. Labor is typically 30 to 35% of sales, 35 to 40% of our cost of goods. For cut flower growers, it can be as high as 60% of our overall cost of goods. So again, I'll use our Texas terminology. It's muy importante that you start looking at labor as part of the, you figure out labor in your cost accounting and you've got the biggest part of it cracked right there.
Very good. And, you know, there's some good books out there, and then there's some great webinars and articles on the ASCFG website. You know, one of the questions that we got was, in this current situation, do local growers have an advantage in terms of cost against flowers imported from South America that are being charged by tariffs, higher minimum wage, etc.? Yes, because our growers are typically closer to the customer. When you're closer to the customer, you have more control over that message. When you have more control over that message, you have more control over the value proposition. And I'll pass that on to Charlie.
Amen. That's
Okay.
You answered, you nailed it. And that advantage there is from an operational standpoint, operational efficiencies. It's from a marketing standpoint. And remember my local sustainable organic example of the study that we conducted. There's great power in that, the local labeling. And even those that sell to HEB, sometimes HEB will put these full-size figures in the store that of the, I don't know that Jimmy will mind. Jimmy Claypack, right? Claypack Greenhouses, right? He sells some things to HEB, and they've got a life-size cutout of Jimmy in the display because they want to emphasize that their flowers were grown 30 miles down the road. So there's great power in that local messaging.
All right, the next one I think is squarely in your court. I'm curious about the amount other growers are spending on marketing. How much dollars should we dedicate to it? I think I'm paraphrasing a little bit there.
Yeah. You know, that's always been a question, regardless of which sector across the green industry. How much should I spend on marketing? The answer is it depends. You know, but in general, most people are spending 2 to 3% of their sales on marketing dollars. That's kind of a rule of thumb. I'd like to see it in the 4, 5, 6% if you're a business consumer and it's more expensive. So you have to spend more dollars than if you're going business to business. For the business to business, you have usually one person you're dealing with, and you have to convey that value proposition to that one person because they're the buyer for that particular channel. But in the case of B2C, I mean, you got a little more reach that you got to make, and it's more expensive. So it could be 4 or 5% of sales that you got to spend on marketing. Now, I say those as rules of thumbs, and the vast minority of businesses out there actually spend that. In fact, marketing dollars are the first thing that's cut whenever we get a downturn. And that's really when you should spend more on marketing dollars, because when everybody else is cutting and there's not any people shouting in the room, your voice can be heard much better. So you almost want to think like Warren Buffett, think counter to the trend and not necessarily be susceptible to cutting marketing dollars in the midst of these contractions.
I think that leads us right to the next question, which is really good. If 2026 budgets have already been set for the year in a business, um, should any adjustments or buffers be made for a volatile year? Can you talk about how a business might be doing that and how much?
Yeah, in the midst of volatility, I don't know that you need to make any major adjustments, particularly in terms of cutting what you've already got in place. But if you think about adding to a marketing budget midstream, that's certainly doable. But you want to do a couple of things. First of all, working capital is very important to businesses in the midst of volatility. And a lot of times I'll see folks, which is basically the short definition of working capital is your current assets minus current liabilities on the balance sheet, right? It tells you how much money that you've got basically to operate your business day to day. That's working capital. Well, I've seen too many businesses that have grown excellent quality cut flowers. That's not the problem. They've got great marketing. That's not the problem. They burn through their cash. And so managing cash and managing working capital, that's not a very sexy topic, but it's a very important topic. So you can make adjustments. You could increase marketing dollars. You just want to make sure that you don't burn through too much working capital just in case something unexpected happens geopolitically, like starting a war or something of that nature. So you want to be aggressive, but you don't want to burn through working capital and leave yourself susceptible with not having cash when you might need cash. So in fact, in one of my 4-part sermons that I would use today, one of those would be you got to manage your balance sheet every bit as hard as you do your income statement. Right? It's not just, and I know the tendency is for a lot of cut flower growers, they live in the income statement, but you gotta back up a little bit and you gotta pay attention to the balance sheet as well and work it every bit as hard during these times of volatility.
Next question we got here for direct to consumer markets. We had that list there. What buyer trends have you been seeing recently? Is buyer interest going up or down in those particular categories? I will start real quick and then I'll have Charlie actually provide the numbers. My impression is that for the most part, the bump that we got from COVID has definitely leveled off. I would say last year, there's a lot of folks that did well. Some folks did not. And what I heard a lot was people in general did well, but things were just off just a little bit in this category and just a little bit in that category. And then when they got to the end of the year, they were pretty close to the year before. Now, that's just my general impression. Charlie, you probably have some more specific numbers on how people did.
Yeah, I've got national data straight out of the GDP data on flowers, seeds, and potted plants. And I can draw you an air graph. Let me see if I can draw it backwards. All right, so in this air graph, before the pandemic, we're growing glacially. That's the term I like to use. You know how fast a glacier moves, right? We're growing, but we're growing glacially. The pandemic hits, and we start growing at about a 30% increase in that curve. And it's good demand, solid demand, and we get a little bit of cover to raise our prices, and so sales go up, but then they plateau. And you had in 2022, it's plateau, and it starts going down a little bit. And that's what I'm saying to myself, I've seen this before. All right, we get that big jump, a shot in the arm, and then we go back to trend. And then we can't take off again. This time, we plateaued, and did a little bit of a dip, we went back up. And we increased a little bit, but then we plateaued again. And then we went down in 2023. towards the middle of the year, and then we went back up again. Two times it tricked me, and it wasn't done, because in 2024 we did the same thing. We had a 3-month dip, and I thought, okay, here we're going back to trend again. But then it curved back, and in 2025, the same thing, the same plateau. Although at the end of 25, we've had 4 straight months of decreases. But even with those 4 months of decreases, we in the early 2026, the January and the preliminary February data, because it's not finalized yet, but we've kind of plateaued again, come back up a little bit. So the good news is that even with that little bit of decrease at the end of 2025, we're still well above where we were in 2019. We're well above where we were. So now, right now, it's still an expanded market, and we hadn't gone back to trend, and it's been 3 solid years since it's been, I guess, the height of where we were during the pandemic is 2022. So we've had 3 years and some months since then, and we've threatened to go back down the trend, but we haven't. So
we're holding on to the COVID bump.
On. Yeah, holding on.
Wow,
yeah, it's a great way to put it. Holding on to the COVID bump. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. All right. So one of the questions here says a little more specific. We started selling 80% to one florist, but last year in our 4th year, that florist has dropped off sales. We picked up a wholesale company and sold more bouquets. I'm trying to decide my focus for 2026. What worked for 2024 isn't what made us money in 2025. So that's kind of getting to, when should a person really decide to make a big pivot in what they're doing? Charlie, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, there's the advantage of having 80% of your sales tied to one florist is that as long as that florist is getting your value proposition, no problem. But then when that florist drops out, then you're left trying to move that product in other channels. So I would continue my exploration efforts and try to diversify my customer mix. And whatever worked in 25, I couldn't pick it up in the question there. Whatever you did to make money in 25, explore more of it. But then, going the wholesale route is going to move volume, but it's not going to move in terms of margins. There's going to be tighter margins. So there's trade-offs. And so it depends on what your cash situation is, whether you need to build cash. And so that may dictate in the short run, you have to make decisions, and you may sacrifice some margin in the short run to move some volume to generate the cash to pay the bank and to keep in business. But in the longer run, you got to seek out customers that are aligned with that vision that John started with. And that may be a wholesaler, may not be, but you got to have a customer base that fits what your vision for your company is. And John said it so well earlier.
All right, and I would, I would add, it may be time for a conversation with that florist. Is it a matter of competition from other local growers? Is it a matter that, have you drifted off of your mark a little bit, and that's starting to show up in lost sales? It could be something that you have control over, and it could be something you don't have control over. To be able to figure out what's going on there. What would be the key differences in terms of direct sales to consumers between the Canadian and American markets? As a Canadian, I feel some of our trends may be different. Oh, golly, that's a fun one. I'm not sure I know what to say on that one.
At 4:30 this afternoon, I'm headed on a plane to Calgary, and I'll be talking to the Canadians tomorrow. And the trending, the overall scope of the trends are roughly the same, but it's the magnitude that differs. So I can't say that anything what we've said so far is markedly different. The bifurcation of the customers and the inelasticity of demand, the value proposition, all that holds true. It's just in terms of magnitude. And not all provinces in Canada are created equal in terms of economic performance. I just happened to be going to Alberta, And I study the Canadian economy every bit as much as, well, not every bit as much, but a lot, because I know that our two economies are so closely linked, and the green industries in those two countries are so closely linked that I pay attention a lot to what's happening in Canada. But not all provinces are operating at the same economic efficiency right now. And it just happens to be I'm going into one where housing is stronger than other provinces, and the prognosis is good. So I don't know where in Canada that you are. Bring a warm coat. I'm in the Calgary airport now. Oh, it's a small world. Yeah, I got my coat, but trust me, a Texas coat in Canada doesn't cut it. So I may be looking for one while I'm there. But anyway.
We have probably time for one more question, and it's a good one, I think, as well. Um, Basically talking about the increase in labor costs, and are prices keeping pace with the increase in labor costs is really, I think, the question.
Yeah. I calculate an index of prices paid by growers, and I look at all the inputs that growers utilize. And I calculate what the year over year change in those input costs. And since 2019, the cost of labor, the cost of fertilizer, plant protection products, we don't say pesticides anymore, plant protection products, freight, trucking, the supplies and repairs, all that. I measure all that. Since 2019, it's increased by 23%. I'm rounding up 22.5 to 23%. So that means if I've not raised my prices since 2019, 23%, I'm sharing profit margin with my customers. And I may like my customers. I may interact with them a lot, and they may be friends with them, but I don't necessarily have to share my profit margin with them. They're going to get their profit margin. So the prognosis, my forecast for 2026, as it stands right now with the tariff structure and so forth, I'm still looking at another 3.7% in 2026 increase, which is a little higher than last year. We got a little bit of reprieve in spite of the tariffs because energy prices were so low. And so that we've gotten a little bit of reprieve while food prices are high, energy prices are low, and which has an influence on the Canadian market, right? Because the Canadian economy is very dependent on energy prices, and so that's why some provinces are struggling in terms of making their budget meet and at the local level because of that. So yeah, I guess that's my main comment is you gotta, if you're not seeing it, you can Google index of prices paid by growers, Dr. Charlie Hall. It'll come up, and I disseminate it through a Cultivate or American Hort, and talk a little bit about that on the stage at Cultivate and other settings. But just look for that, and I'll be releasing this year's release in the next week, so it'll be hot off the press. But basically, what I told you just now is the big part. 23% increase since 2019. So look at your pricing structure, and have you increased prices accordingly? And then, expect a little more for this year. And how do we create that runway in front of us on pricing when we're already starting to get some pushback from customers? That's a tricky one. You know what the answer is? It's 2 words: value proposition. That's the only way. It's the only way. It's the only way you can get it. There's no other way. You can't cut your way out of it. You got to go the price route, right? You can't shave 23% off your cost all at once. You got to go the price route. To go the price route, you got to emphasize value proposition. Whew, John,
right.
We did it, man. This
Very
has been
good.
fun. It's been a great 1-2 punch back and forth. Maybe we set a new trend, a new tradition.
There we
I
go.
hope so.
Thank you so much, Charlie. I'm going to finish with one more comment here. Charlie's an expert in all things financial, but some of you may not know that he has also done a lot of work on the benefits of
Oh,
plants to humans. And he finished with talking about the value proposition. That's a big part of the value proposition. the importance of cut flowers in our lives. And he's just done a lot of great work on that aspect of our industry as well. So thank you for all that you've done for the cut flower industry, Charlie.
Absolutely. It's my passion, right?
Yeah. So, again, yes, let me echo that. John and Curly, this has been amazing. I love the conversation between you two. I can clearly see the passion and the joy on these topics. So, thank you so much. And, when you talked about starting a new tradition, I hope so. I would be delighted to work with you to make that happen. So, yeah, I'll be knocking on your email inbox door. Right. So again, thank you so much. This has been incredible. And thank you everyone who has joined us today. I know this is kind of a new time for folks. Typically we have a lot of our webinars in the evening, but we're kind of borrowing from a lunch and learn model for this series. And I'd love to hear your feedback if this time works out for you. So please email me if you have any thoughts, shout out to us on Instagram, however you find us, let us know what you think. And then in addition, I just want to remind folks, if you're not a member yet, please scan the QR code that's on the screen, and you can join the ASCFG at a discounted rate today. We just the more the merrier. We are growers who connect with one another and learn from each other and get to learn from wonderful people like Charlie and John. And we'd love you to experience their benefit too. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to end the webinar. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and just take care. John and Charlie, thank you again.
You bet.
Thank you. Safe travels,
Okay,
Charlie.
have a great
Thank
night.
you.
Have a great
Bye.
day.